Hello, comrades, and welcome to another episode of my Crisis in the Kremlin Let's Play. This is Northstar. Hope you folks are well. For new folks on the channel, that greeting is in character, because this is a game we play as the premier of the Soviet Union, and try and stop it from collapsing, so please don't click away just because you're offended by the greeting or something. That is the game. Of course, I will give historical context to things, and I'm sure some people will attack me as being quote, soft on socialism or whatever nonsense. I am that. In fact, I am a democratic socialist, not a communist, not a Marxist-Leninist, but a democratic socialist. And that does not mean what Bernie Sanders says it means. I support workers' cooperatives and the eventual outlawing of corporations, owned by stockholders and pass-through corporations and all that kind of nonsense. Of course, paired with a democratic system where there's huge restrictions to prevent money in politics, huge restrictions on campaign financing and public financing of campaigns. Anyways, for many decades, no major steps have been made to further the conquest of space travel. Only minor steps. We must change that. The red flag shall fly over the red planet. First steps on Mars. For those new to this particular series, so I've brought every country that I could into my block except for India and China, which are hard because the way to do India, well, I mean, they're allies, but to bring them into Comic-Con, integrate more closely, you have to do the War for Kashmir, which requires a very large army. Which the only way to do that, I'm pretty sure, is you need the highest level of conscription, the highest level of military tech on the left path. Life military, so these all lead to a large army size for other things. This leads to large army size, higher conscription levels, and finally, I didn't realize this, but I'm pretty sure this is the case. Closer to unitary state. I think unitary state has the largest army because otherwise the federations, the Soviet republics retain some of the military where you don't really have control over it and they just keep it local for natural disaster response or defense, whatever. Weakest military under Lisbon Treaty, probably the strongest under unitary state in terms of army size, which is necessary to give military aid to many countries. Send troops to Afghanistan, you need army size over 4 bars, which I was failing to have for a very long time until I swapped to fake federation and army size went right up to 5. I don't think that's a coincidence. So I could eventually win this, but if I can do the War for Kashmir, I can strike the terrorist bases in Pakistan, which historically the State Department and CIA funneled money to Al-Qaeda. Which had military bases over the border in Pakistan to fight the Soviets in the Afghan War. There's a whole movie, it's actually a comedy, called Charlie Wilson's War about this. It takes the historical events, portrays them accurately, more or less, but then adds a whole bunch of comedy to show how absurd the whole thing was, and especially when the U.S. then ended up having to fight Al-Qaeda later in the, after 2001, not aiding in the rebuilding the country after the Soviets withdrew, also not aiding in the rebuilding of the Soviet Union, created huge problems. The former Soviet countries like Russia, Kazakhstan should have been massively rebuilt with U.S. money, because collapsing socialism led to absolute economic devastation. Instead, the countries were led to suffer horrendously. Millions of people died who wouldn't have otherwise. The surplus deaths were well over 2 million. In fact, I have a chart somewhere. There's this British economist who did calculations of surplus death rates, and I think he had a much larger number, like 6 million surplus deaths. That's due to the HIV pandemic absolutely exploding in Russia and Kazakhstan and other former members of the Soviet Union because of the collapse of the healthcare system with the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's due to deaths due to alcoholism and other diseases of despair. Opioids, alcoholism skyrocketed as the system was starting to collapse, and after it collapsed, by the way, opioid epidemic in the United States, a sign of a collapsing system, as well as a collapsing healthcare system in particular. The Soviet allied countries had famines in many cases because some of them imported food from the Soviet Union or imported fertilizer, or other kinds were otherwise dependent. North Korea had a famine right after the collapse of the Soviet Union for this reason, for instance. It was horrendous human suffering all over the planet. Just because the US was so absolutely freaking determined to win the Cold War at any cost, and had no interest in actually helping buffer the pain that it would cause when the US did win. Of course, it wouldn't have won if Gorbachev hadn't undertaken drastic reforms far too quickly and destabilized the whole system. Speaking of instability, do some resource extraction in Guinea. Raise disapproval high enough there might be a tiny chance of flipping pro-US. If it's over 50 that does that. Of course, I'm increasingly convinced that, so it has to be over 60. Sierra Leone as well. I have many uses for that money. Let's see. A little more state propaganda keeps the Warsaw Pact more loyal. Foreign Ministry. It's worth noting there's events that lead to direct control, but apparently if you don't do the unification, the commie one, you never get the FALP one that allows direct control. So it's actually, I don't think you can do this if you already had unification. It's actually better to use the events to go from live and sovereignty up if you can last long enough. Because this one's very hard to get. You need Khrushchev's foreign policy and head of state rights laws, usually. Or you need the Trotskyites in power. Or the liberals, which means you've gone capitalist. Direct control of the Warsaw Pact is hard. Beneficial, though, because it makes the loyalty decay almost non-existent. Which means you have to put as much money into propaganda. So this run is almost over anyways, and when it is, but I do know when I'm thinking of having a custom leader who has a looser policy on interior control. Because, the level of repression I did is morally objectionable. And probably not necessary in order to stop the Soviet Union collapsing, even on hard. And probably makes for a more challenging game, and should lead to some benefits, actually, like reduced corruption. From probably less censorship of the media at the start and a less fairer judicial system, more controls on police forces. Police democratization, for instance, should reduce corruption versus law and order. Can't really do many reforms. Because moderates reformers are generally not. Well, the reformers aren't legalized, and very high support for the ultra left here. I think I stopped actively supporting him a while ago. Yep. I still have this guy increasing their support, though. keep that up. And the reason why is mainly if I can get to unitary state. The Trotsky's have to be legalized, or the head of state has to write laws. Which requires leaderism. Oh, you have to legalize the Trotskyites to get to that. Oh, geez. So it's actually impossible to do that, since there's no way to legalize them at this point. Well, still, the ultra-left. Probably, let's see, my left-wing loyalty is much higher than the right-wing. So I still want to encourage him to reduce the power of the moderates who are considered right-wing. Anything beyond conservative, so Trots, Stalinists are left-wing, and conservatives, I believe. Right-wing is moderates, reformers, and liberals. Just so I have less problems with events from groups that dislike me having too much power. Anyways, how's the intellectual loyalty? It's probably higher because of the policy. So it's high enough to maybe avoid too many of the shift money into culture spending events. Healthcare is not actually maxed. Interesting. Put a little more money into healthcare, more into military tech. I'm not sure if there's declining. Like, this might not give nearly. This, 280 might not give 4 times the science points of 70 here. There might be diminishing returns. I want science points. There are a few events I can get when I get particular techs. Life militarization could help with the Afghan war, which destabilized the US a little. Genetically modified products has an event that can benefit me. Actually, those are the 2 main things left. This just increases internal stability a little. And this I can't do until after the US collapses. Already survived to 1986, so I got the first easiest victory, but if I can collapse NATO, which requires first making the US go isolationist, there's another higher victory, and if on top of that I can achieve communism, which the OGAS events, which I haven't gotten yet, then there's the highest victory. In fact, the game ends if you've made the whole world red at that point. There's no way to continue. Anyways, first man on Mars. Far and mysterious. The red planet of our system has been a desert for a long time and has never seen a human. Until now. Comrade, I'm proud to report that our manned mission to Mars is a success. Soviet people on board our interplanetary ship were the first ones to reach Mars. This path wasn't easy. We had to restore Fyodostov's HIS project, that's probably a nuclear propulsion project, then send ship modules to orbit so it could be constructed by astronauts on the Mir space station. So orbital assembly plus nuclear thermal propulsion, I'm guessing, or at least nuclear reactors with ion engines. And of course, we had to prepare the crew. Ion engines have very low thrust, so that would have taken... The way you would do that is you would send a cycle or ship into an orbit that goes to Mars and comes back to Earth on a basic or free return trajectory, unmanned, with ion engines, and then send a crew to intercept as it comes back around to Earth, because it would take years to get into the proper orbit with ion engines, many years. Of course, we had to prepare the crew. Their deed will be remembered by world history. It could become more famous than Neil Armstrong's steps. Yeah, I think men on Mars would. Our astronauts took soil samples, filmed the chronicles of our Martian victory, and went for a walk in the desert. Arrival over here is expected to be next year, as return home. Now, after our lunar and Martian victories, the Soviet Union is the country which won the space race. This is all history. Show the victory of the world, or you can do this to get more science points. This probably destabilized the US and probably pushed them finally into isolationism. The Earth was shaken By the table of us planting the Soviet flag on Mars, Western countries couldn't believe that a communist country was the first one to send a manned expedition to the Red Planet. Society of the USA was in a condition close to mourning because of the latest victories of the Soviet Union. Soviet flag on faraway Mars was the last nail to finish the coffin of the American space program. The President of the USA admitted that his country suffered a crushing defeat in the space race, so the creation of an American lunar base was cancelled. Only Hollywood directors do the movies in which Americans bravely fight with the empire of evil in outer space, claiming that the Soviet Union is an empire of evil, which is nonsense. It was the lesser evil compared to the US in the Cold War. Both sides were terrible and did horrendous things. Some people be like, oh, you're both sizing it, but it's true. The Soviets did some really nasty things, especially around the World War II era. Massacres and such. I referred to these before. The United States, on the other hand, carried out horrible mass murders in places like Indonesia, Bangladesh, Guatemala. Millions killed. I'm not going to use a certain word for it because of YouTube censorship. Videos that use that word don't get as many views, but millions of people killed by US-backed puppet regimes in the Third World. Far, far worse than anything the Soviets did. But that does not excuse the things the Soviets did. They were also wrong. Anyways, only Hollywood directors do the movies in which Americans bravely fight with empire of evil in outer space, but we can surely say they would be remembered by history, at least as a leader of the country, which won the space race. Boom. Now let's see what that did to the indicators. Yeah. Probably get the emergency election of Donald Trump event next, which is how the US becomes isolationist. Or they'll elect Ron Paul? Sorry, that makes him isolationist immediately, or Trump. They have to collapse a little further. It's Trump.